Hello and welcome to episode number 396 of the Armin Show podcast. Wow, we built something great over time. All the same themes, support on various channels, YouTube, Spotify, wherever it might be. Different places, different people, different concepts. On this one here, this is interesting, was on episode number 6 of the show. Now we are on episode number, this will be 396 of the show. Wow, that was 2017. It's 2023 at this point. Johnny De Froscia, welcome to the show.
How you doing, Armin?
I am doing swell and cool to have you back on in person. That's super duper.
Good being here. I'm basically going to take over the show from now on.
It's the John De Froscia show.
This is the Johnny Be Good show.
He's a good man, and he's on the program. We had previously talked about history, a bit of things of depth, sophistication, which is not as common.
Of intellectualism.
Yes. We brought some intellectualism onto the program and have some material in a separate space, variety of spaces that I like to cover. But before that, we are at Johnny location, and how are all, I never asked that. How are all things going in a broad natured sense? I never asked that question.
In a broad nature sense, well, things are going. You know, life keeps moving forward, and you got to move forward with. And I think the goal that everyone should have is to keep bettering themselves and to acquire as much knowledge and experience in life that they could get and that they could share with the world, with possibly even their loved ones.
Some information has been shared with me. I now have an inside different shirt, and we are alternating as far as colors, color scheme, sense of style.
Look at these fine gentlemen right here.
Unbelievable, right? I'm going to bring that one up for variety purposes. You have a sense of style somewhat. You can see it. Where'd it come from? Why?
I think women would agree with me, but you know what you put on is a self-expression, you know. So I think it's important for both men and women to be kind of hygienically appear well-to-do, right? I think even more so for men specifically that it doesn't really come to us naturally, and I think there's only a small percentage of men that a sense of fashion, a sense of style, possibly even a sense of confidence is naturally inhibited, you know. So I think, you know, I've being an only child, you know, I had to develop my own sense of style, you know. I think there's certain colors that I resonate with, such as burgundy. That's why I was pushing the burgundy.
He was pushing the burgundy real hard.
I'm extremely biased, but I think that looking good, feeling good is important to carrying yourself as a man.
Fair. So you're biased basically towards burgundy.
Yeah, just totally biasing against other colors.
Other colors don't have a chance. Blue, aquamarine, others. Fashion is important. It's self-expression. It represents you publicly. That's a good point. Maybe my previous pairing was not the most matching fit.
It was god-awful.
Commentary. Good commentary there. Long live the feedback, which is helpful. I like feedback. I don't know how many individuals do, but I like it because feedback takes me from where I am to somewhere better with a little bit of friction along the way.
Yeah, it's also like a sense of growth, you know. You know who your friends are if they could speak their mind. You know, how are you gonna learn if you surround yourself with a bunch of yay sayers, yay people, you know?
That's true. If it's like, hey, no, that's great. No, that is great. No, that's great. No, that's great. Maybe they're not all great.
We don't all make good choices along the way, you know, so it's important to keep an open mind. I think that part of the problem of today's society is that we're also fragile. We have fragile egos. You know, feelings are more important than fact and truth, biology. It's important to keep people around that keep it real.
Fragility and weakness go hand in hand. Broad question: how does the average person become less fragile and be able to take in feedback, adjust what they're thinking, not be stuck in this is what I am comfortable with, and that's it. I can't go outside these bounds.
You know, that's a really good question. I don't think I have the guidebook here, but
Johnny actually has the guidebook.
It's in my back pocket, but I think the most important thing is having like like a sense of identity, like build your resilience, like have a modicum of self-esteem, of confidence, of basic principles that you adhere to, and with that, you feel comfortable and resolute when someone tells you or gives you constructive criticism. In that case, you already know they're not attacking you; they're trying to make you better.
Identity. Do you find out the things you like? Do you think about like this is what I've represented for many years? Well, how do you build a pillar off of something? Where do these pillars come from that you're like, I'm Mike and these are my
I'm
things?
pro this, I'm anti that. I think a lot of it has to do with how you were raised. You know, who's around you, who has influenced you. This comes from your family background. This comes from an educational background. In terms of knowledge. Like some people like Anne Rice. Some people were heavily influenced by Socrates or Marcus Aurelius. Like some people were influenced by like reality TV. So it depends on what resonates with you. And I'm not saying whichever one's right or wrong. We're all different. So it's based on what you latch onto and what you evolve from. Because as we go from point A to point B in life, we don't necessarily stay stagnant on life's perspectives and experiences and ideologies. I think we evolve. I think at one point I was religious and not no more. At one point I was a Democrat. I'm not no more. So we evolve from something. We enter this world as a blank slate. We are brainwashed by our family, our parents, the education system, the country we live in. Like if I was born in the Middle East, I wouldn't be raised a Catholic or a Christian for the most part, right? So it just depends. There's all these factors of environment, of nature, nurture that come into play. And it befalls on an individual to make their own critical thinking choices on how they want to live and how they want to carry themselves and what attitudes and ideas to carry forth.
Should the average person wake up, this might be a tip, but like wake up and say, write out, I value this. This is what I resonate with. Like I connected before with the personal development community many years ago in like 2008, 9, 10, 11. And some of the science books resonate with me. Certain activity, people like who say things or creators. So these are people I've connected with. Do you think about like the people you've connected with before and then in the morning write down like, this has been my crew. I want to build upon this. What can the average person do in the morning or in the evening? Challenge questions. Suddenly life coach.
That was a very expansive question. I think that I was just even considering like how I don't necessarily follow through with a lot of self-help ideas of such as journaling and writing little charts and talking about their best experiences with their certain friends or writing their list of friends. Absolutely. Like there's a correlation between actual self-growth and people who chart their goals, who chart their reflective strategies or ideas in their life. I'm not a morning person, so I'm not going to write anything in the morning. So you got to like operate and understand how well you operate. Like my mind's awake at night, so that's a good time for me to write down any things that come mentally to better myself or even just self-esteem. I think one thing from a dad's group I follow, they said write out 10 things that is unique about you and that you bring to the table. And that could be relationally or just generally in life, and writing those things out, obviously is going to make you reflect on your value as a human, and that's just hitting that specific question and answer, right? So like obviously in other things you might want to write out your short-term goals and what you need to get done to get there. Like I think a lot of motivational speakers, Anthony Robbins is a big one, where he taught incrementalism. So like if you want to get from point A to point B, you gotta think short term. Like like well first, to be a journalist, I have to get the education, and then there's steps involved. To help you like process the eventuality of success. It's just, everything's done in small measures.
I had a past guest you reminded me of. His website was incremental.nyc. Cameron Porter, Major League Soccer player, and he valued the same concept of like, if you can make things slightly better repeatedly, then over time it's substantial. And also,
it's like the tipping point. I think oh man, who's that author?
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah, Gladwell. He the tipping point where it's you keep pushing to one side and it's going to teeter-totter to something, right? So if you keep making good choices and behave in a manner in terms of success, then you're gonna get there, because you're taking one step at a time to this race, to this marathon race, right?
It's a good point. And also, I like the idea of like you're showcasing or you're verbalizing or you're doing a thing, and each little thing is like toward that. You're making a statement through all of it, but you're saying, I'm going this way with every little item, or you tell people something, or you think about it, or you write it, or you do a thing, or you connect with somebody.
Yeah, if you have it in the forefront of your consciousness, then you're gonna achieve it. Manifestation is not something that. Actually, let me rephrase. It's a valuable resource. It's a valuable tool. And this is why religion and prayer is cross-continental, cross-culture, because when people pray, they're attempting to manifest. When people pray, Lord God, help me get through this situation. Help me become a doctor. What I plan to do is I'm going to stop messing around with my boys. I'm going to do this. That's the element of prayer. That's an element of manifestation that is coincides. You know what I mean? Because that's the whole element of, if you break down manifestation, is you verbalize or you write out your goal, and then you indicate what you're willing to sacrifice to get that goal. I'm not saying I'm a pro at this. I'm not.
So you're a pro at this.
I'm definitely not a pro at this. But I think I have an understanding of you got to know what you want, and then you got to understand you're gonna have to give something up to get it. And that's why there's certain prayers that work and certain that doesn't. Does that make sense?
A little bit. You're saying like the bridging of the gap, almost, because it's almost like from your side you're going towards what is, and when you speak things, you pull them from further away towards you as well. Each little thing bridges the gap.
Yeah. You could look at that. You got to put in the work, and it's not just verbalizations. Like, I want to be a good person.
Oh, that's
but if
sorry.
If you ain't working
one.
or striving incrementally to interact with people in a positive and helpful manner, then you're not going to be a good person. It's just talk, right? So there's an element of action there as well.
Yes. That's a nice one, to be a good person. It's good to have a vision of something. The 1% thing is nice for incremental. Like, if you do 1%, it sounds like no improvement per day. But if you did that for like 50 days, 100 days, 200 days, you'd have a crazy growth.
It goes back to that Gladwell,
right?
What was it?
Tipping point.
Like 1,000 hours, 10,000 hours.
Yes.
Yeah.
It means something. It's like you're almost willing your way. You're expressing your way to there, and it's clear along the way.
Through discipline and action, basically.
Yes, and people can see it. So you are actually representing something to others along the way. Maybe that's the meaningful part of it. Because you get there.
Well, I think it's meaningful for yourself, and then obviously, like, if people who specifically knew your path and knew where you came from, they could derive inspiration.
Yes, I like that concept. I like the idea of like when you want to do something, write towards it, then tell somebody about it, then do some of it, then try something you haven't had in that, then Google something about that.
You know, it's interesting with life that sometimes you hear conflicting information, and there's a lot of people who say, like, especially like entrepreneurs, they say, write out a plan, don't tell anybody,
Right. There's that.
grind, and then do it. You know,
There's a lot of that
But-
posted online.
but I think that's black and white thinking. Like, not everyone kind of like operates the same way because we're all different, and I think that sometimes it you know, in terms of expression, it helps to. It's been statistically proven that if you have a support network, you derive more happiness, and you might be more able to strive for that success, for that goal, you know. But I get it. Like, I think if you're someone who just runs their mouth, like, and just tells everyone something, but they don't put action to it, you know, then you lose stature, you lose status. So you know, it just depends.
And it also, if it's like, if your interest is in creative expression that includes people, you can't really grind without people
by yourself. Yeah.
versus like
I think this topic is like, are you more introverted or are you more extroverted? And like, if you're more extroverted, then you derive more energy and inspiration by being around people who could help build you up, or, you know, as I said before, provide constructive criticism, or just on your same level.
you made me think of somebody right there. I'm not sure why, but maybe think of a person right now. So here's a slightly different but similar category. There's a content creator who is very, we'll say, I don't know how to describe, but makes things seem dramatic, whatever it is. Short little statements like, doing this, went there. And then like when talks to individual, you know, let's say it was John, this is the John episode. So it makes it more like everything is pieces of a movie. It looks a little bit gimmicky from afar, but it seems to resonate with those who want that kind of thing. And a lot of society likes movies and something that seems larger than nature, maybe a hero's adventure. Is there something about that that resonates? What are your thoughts on that category of expression where you make everything quite dramatic? Is it fruitful? Or is it a different style?
I was very vague, but
Yes, vague is one
I
of...
think there's an element of entertainment value to certain things. I mean, you could say like certain podcasts, look, Fresh and Fit, perhaps, like they'll just yell out certain phrases and things like that. But like, to be honest, like they actually resonate with me. You know, like I respect the guys.
This is
from
an
Fresh and
important
Fit.
point. They resonate with
You know,
you.
they resonate with me for sure. But
Oh, that's a good point. Right. If the items...
yeah, you're right.
The
If
important part
the
is that they
subject matter
resonate.
resonates, then that element of entertainment resonates. Does it make sense?
That's a good point.
So like, if they're talking about something like I don't know, like legal
classical music.
court stuff, you know, like
Court
that.
stuff.
Like I'm no lawyer. Like that doesn't resonate with me. Like it might not resonate with me, right?
Right. So if they said this is the new documentation from the trial and they made it dramatic, you still wouldn't.
Yeah, I don't watch no Law and Order, you know. So
But if it's in the category of your interest and it makes it like more of a thing, that can be good.
yeah, you have higher degree of listening to it, I guess.
That's a good point. I like that point. It makes sense to me. Right. You're adding more to the story in a way. Do you get what I'm saying? Kind of like, whereas if it was just this is happening versus like this is the happening and this is how it went. Day 1, day 4. It seems more like, you know, one of those shows where it's like it was 10:54. What were you doing?
Well, I think it provides like a punchline,
Yeah.
you know, and then things with punchlines kind of break down the whole episode or break down the whole subject matter, right? Same thing with like comedy. If there's no punchline, it's just a long story, right?
It's a good point.
That's
There's
supposed to
no,
have
like,
comedic
bam.
value, but no bam. So I guess in terms of being a little dramatic, then there has to be some sort of wake up and listen to me kind of thing.
Wake up and listen to me. It grabs attention in a world that is very attention deprived. Attention, is your attention algorithmed or do you control it well in 2023? This is a big issue. I recently talked about attention span.
I think it's a little bit of mix, just because I think I've grown out of the ADHD, like young person kind of mental frame. I think with social media and technology, like there are challenges to separate yourself from this flood of not only information but of people and and distract you from what you need to get done in your life. And like I'm right there with the normal Joe Schmo, where like sometimes I spend a little bit of time on social media. Does it provide value to my life? No, it really doesn't. But I do think the one element that I do appreciate from all this social media is that you could learn so many things about so many different things. Like you could see
History.
a temple like in Asia on the flip of a dime, and then you could learn things about YouTube automation that you didn't think about, like besides just Googling, obviously. So you could see beautiful locations. You could understand certain bits of history. Specifically now with YouTube, that's a huge moneymaker. Let alone there's a plethora of knowledge that you could acquire. Coming from like I'm kind of a balanced guy. Like I like a lot of different things. So I'll watch some history videos. I'll watch like video game videos. I'll watch stuff about some celebrities because they're entertaining to me. Things like that. So like you control what you put in front of you, right? And as an adult, you got to decide like what is worth your time. Things that will help you grow, or things that will just distract you or escapism. And personally, I think for me, it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. Escapism is a big one. A lot of running happening in different programs. Now, you had mentioned one program, Fresh and Fit. There's the relationship space. I watched a lot of the different relationship space. I have for many years, and even read when they used to have articles, and it's a category of interest. And actually, I saw a couple days ago some psychologist professor said every time she interviews her students at the end of the semester, or the beginning or the end, what's your most highest area of interest that we study? And there was like 10 categories, but relationships and attraction or something like that was number one, or is number one every time.
Yeah, I think the
It beats
reason
out
why that
everything.
is because I think dating is confusing. I think the opposite sex, if for the most part, 80 to 90% of men don't understand women. Like, we have to read up on it, we have to learn about it in order for us to get attention. Women don't understand men because they don't need to understand men. They could just walk around and get attention like that. So but they get frustrated when they can't understand us because they never took the time. And then now the modern female refuses to listen to men on what we want.
Like the majority.
Oh yeah, especially yeah, because feminism has taken like the radicalized version of feminism. So that's why a lot of these relationship podcasts, specifically now, you see a lot more. Like, you would probably use the word conservative, perhaps, or like religious even. For us, it'll be like Manosphere, Red Pill, podcast, because they're I feel like they're just vital to shift the mind frame now that is so leftist, that is so feminized, that it's okay to be masculine, and it's okay to understand the differences between men and women.
Is it okay to be a guy?
It's in the words of Jordan Peterson, it's absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary. And it's okay to be a man. It's okay to be masculine.
What are some key differences between a guy and a portion of society that is not so much in 2023? What are some missing pieces in the average non-guy that's a guy but not a guy?
I think going back to even just self-discipline and being principled and
Having their own identity.
Yeah, having their own purpose and identity. I think the climate and the westernized culture has become so comfortable that there's a saying that bad times create men or harder individuals, and then what was it? I totally lost the frame.
Good times
Good times create weak men.
weak
Bad
men.
times create strong men.
Right.
Does that
Or
make
weak men
sense?
create hard times. Hard times create
Yeah, it's a
strong
cycle.
men. Strong men create
Good times,
good
and then good
times
times create
create
weak men.
Yeah.
Yeah, so because where we're at now, we're so comfortable, like it's almost as if we've abandoned the fear of survivalism. Now it's about comfort. So now we've lost part of our drive to be men, to protect and provide and find a purpose, and I don't think anyone's at fault. I think that's just the way of it. Like, when life becomes easier, that's just the way of it. But I also think that accountability and perhaps feminization of men is also at play here.
Do you see pendulum swings in society like every 10 years or so? Do you see like it goes this direction, then it's like, oh, too far, wait a minute, we might need to pull back type thing?
I mean, that's the yin and yang of life, right? So it's ebb and flow, and I think that's just how life operates. So, I think there's a humanity as a whole doesn't operate as a balanced force. They operate as a yin and yang. So they pendulum swing to one side and they pendulum swing to the other side. And we're just on the downswing on one right now.
This is a popular topic, way more popular in discussion now than it was 5 years ago, 8 years ago. There's way more vocalization in what you're describing here. There's a response, in a way, to what happened, let's say 10 years ago, 8 years ago, through social media. There is more of a towards being a guy.
Toxic masculinity.
Sure is a term. A lot of terms, by the way. Terms make their way. I don't know if terms have been too helpful over a long time. They show up and they're like always off. Like,
it's not that they're off. It's just that they're pushing an agenda. You know what I mean? So like, the last 10 years they're trying to label masculinity as a negative thing.
That's what a toxic person would say.
So but no one's talking about toxic femininity. No one's talking about that. Unless you follow Jordan Peterson or something like that. But or Jedediah Bila, I think she talks a lot about toxic femininity, and when you shine a light on one thing, you dismiss the other aspect of what's going on. So if you have weak men, who does that benefit? It's not women.
Absolutely nobody.
I mean, relationally, on an individual scale, like if women want control, sure, yeah, they benefit in that regard. But at the end of the day, are they going to respect their partner if the man is a weak man? No,
doesn't sound like it.
Absolutely not. Let alone, what entity is going to benefit from weak men? That's government. And that's what they're trying to propagate with the agenda of feminism, with the agenda of even the trans movement. Weaken the family. It's statistically proven when you have absent fathers that the increase of men in poverty and homelessness and incarceration, the same statistics of if it's a single dad household is the same as a 2-person household. Like the level of successful children who are out of jail, who are out of the street. So what does that indicate is if the importance of masculinity, the importance of male role models, the importance of the man in the basic unit of family and society. So So when you try to create weak families, when you try to create a weak society, who does that benefit again? Government.
There's a bigger frame to it. How is it counterable, or how does one build that more often? Is it each person by themselves attempting to build a stronger family unit? Is it like there's an ocean wave and it's a strong ocean wave and good luck?
How do you counter that?
Yes, if there's a counter to the strong family unit.
That's a strong question. I think
I only ask the strong ones.
yeah. I think one of the few things that you could do is push back. Push back on what they're trying to do. You know, I think it was important to push back against the vaccine. I think it's important to push back against the indoctrinating children in the trans movement, which doesn't help the individual, you know, causing irreparable physical harm to the child. And then you're going to be a long life customer to big pharma. Again, who does that profit? Certainly not the individual, because they don't care about you. Just feeding them more money. So you have to push back. You have to understand your principles again. It's going back to, what are your principles? And if you see through the barrage of the agendas that they're pushing, and then vocalize. Don't be silent. You know, I think it's important, especially now with social media, you could get these messages across. Like, this is not okay. You're, you know, like, there's you open the door. Like, if you give children the right to irreparably damage their body, are you going to give them the right to serve in the military? Are you going to give them the right to drink and use drugs? Are you going to not I mean, they already do in high school, I get that, you know, but like the legality of it. You're going to have them get tattoos at the age of 8? You know? So there has to be some sort of pushback, so you could just say, no, this is not okay.
There's a slight tangent, but you said they don't care, like, let's say the government. Who are the people that care? How do you find the people who care in your life, other than yourself caring for yourself? How do you locate the care towards you, or is it about you bringing it outward? Where does care originate from? Deep questions by Armin.
You know what? I think it's a good combination of both, because if you're not the light shining forth, caring for people, you're not gonna receive what you don't get, right? So part of it, I think, it's a combination. Is being aware of who people who others represent, what their hidden ulterior motives are, because I think it's significantly easier with like big entities like the government, corporations, because they're the bottom line. They're profit run. You know, they serve other masters. It's easy. It's really easy if you have your eyes wide open and unbiased from the two-party system and other things like that. But in terms of an individual scale, like time and experience, you know, we've known each other for 5+ years, so like I think at this point we have an understanding of where our heart lies, right? It's harder to tell. It's harder to tell when it's an entity, because it's not a person, right? But at the same time, you can tell what they're about. Big pharma with the vaccine. Like, if you've got your eyes open, you could tell what they were about too. So, again, it just, what lens do you have? Like, how open you are to what the message behind the image, right? That's a good one, right? The message behind the image.
The message behind.
Yeah,
the
that'd be a
image.
good poem or something.
Because there might be an image portrayed in front.
Yeah, the image that you first see doesn't necessitate the actual purpose or the heart of said individual or said company or said charity or whatever, right?
This is a big part of our intelligence, is from an early age figuring out what is actual, what is not actual.
Yeah, what's real, what's not, right? What's authentic, what's not, what's genuine, what's not. And again, the same. If they could if they could convince us to go against biology and go against truth and say whatever agenda that they want, what else can they say, right? And I think that was one of the biggest messages that really resonated, at least with the trans ideology, is if they could convince the common man we're already able to critically think and to be very consciously aware that in every other regard of life out there in the animal kingdom, there's two genders. Maybe there's an outlier of the hermaphroditic in certain species or individuals, but those are outliers. They're not necessarily the major stream of life, right? So when a government or an agenda could convince you to go against truth, the biology, in fact, then what else can they convince you to do?
I was
perhaps give up your control as parents so your kids could go willy-nilly and do whatever the hell they want. Perhaps give up our HIPAA rights to be corralled into taking a vaccine that you don't need. There's a domino effect of what's going on. That's at least in my perspective.
This had me thinking of one thing that I had thought of earlier. And so I saw recently a graph that showed that news coverage of items is not proportional to the items. So, for example, terrorism was like 0.02% of deaths or something very small, but it was 30% of news coverage. Heart disease is 30% of deaths, something like that, but it was like 1.5% of news coverage because that's not hard-hitting, wonderful material.
And the reason why they do that is to keep promoting the military complex of constant invasions and occupation of the Middle East, and have like this kind of like religious war, Christians versus Muslims, I guess. In terms of the heart disease, what contributes to heart disease? Obesity, lack of fitness, lack of mental health. So there's a reason why they're not shining the light on that, because they don't want people to keep in mind, be aware that they need to take care of themselves. The government and the medical institution does not want you to be healthy. Why? Because they want repeat customers.
That's been mentioned before, kind of like a therapist. Let's say there's a therapist and you met with them 3 times and worked through something that was important to you. You would only see that individual 3 times, whereas if you were a therapist and were able to meet with somebody once a week for 14 years and slightly work through it or more listen, now you have, the other therapist can't compete with you.
You have active income in the long term.
And the other therapist would lose out compared to you.
Well, I'm a little partial or towards therapy and therapy just because I study psychology, and I've had a few therapists along the way, and I think it's almost necessary to have someone to talk to, also to work your stuff, I think there's like a limit to how long you could see a therapist, because I don't necessarily think that they try to keep a client over a year, maybe at 3, because there's only so much that they could offer you in a frame of time, So I think that in terms of therapy, that's possibly a separate subject on that.
One on that. So the percentages that I just mentioned, in relation to that, the percentages of groups of people came to mind, because there are groups of people in the United States that make up like 0.03% of people, 0.08, 1%, 0.5% is this. But in public discourse, you would think there are 40% of people or 30% because
I wonder what population you're talking about. Yeah, I agree.
so it seems off, and then the only message that can be representative of why that is that, oh, there's more to cover or take care of for these small and sometimes very small groups.
Well, I think they're just pushing an agenda. There's no other reason why you should shine a light on a small percentage of Americans, or just in general, right? There's an agenda afoot.
Right. So before we get into a bit more about relationship space, let's do a brief intermission, and then we will return to get into that space more in depth.
Intermission time.
It's intermission time. Rare
Get your
case.
popcorn.
Get your popcorn, because that was part
Put
one.
the kids to sleep.
Put the kids to sleep, and we'll be right back. And we're back. Part 2 with an intermission, which I will probably be doing more of in the future. Long live the concept of an intermission. Boy, the show is getting really professional out here. Johnny in the building. Johnny, what does it feel like to be back for part 2?
You really get my grinds, my grinds. You get my mental grinds on by your question.
Thank you.
Your questions.
That's what we like to do here.
You get me thinking.
Mm-hmm.
We having a chit chat.
Yes.
And we just philosophizing about life and our personal experiences. I like it. It's good to be back.
I have noticed a difference. And Johnny, we need you to handle this. That lamp is different from previously.
Oh, yeah, let me get that.
The lighting, I know who are watching, you're wondering, how did the lighting change so much? It was a lamp. It was a lamp.
All right, we got it.
Back in action. Now, Johnny, straight to it. I was going to go towards relationships. This is an area that I would think is an area of your expertise, sense of, experiences.
Not really.
Not really, but that's
I have
usually
a lot of opinions.
People who have some skill in a category tend to say not really, and the people that don't will say I'm an expert. So you're not fooling anybody out here. Now, one thing that I wanted to bring up that came to mind first is when all are made more similar, which is happening in the past, let's say, decade, one thing that is killed off or has died a death in recent years is polarity. Polarity is key for the pairing between men and women.
Oh, okay. I get it.
When I speak broadly, sometimes more details. But this polarity is a big deal.
Mainly because women are becoming more masculinized and men are becoming more feminized. So now that there's not a straight up polarity to it. There's not a yin and yang, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's happening.
A battery, if it didn't have a plus and a minus end that were...
It wouldn't work, huh?
Separate, nope. That might be a not useful battery. So if this polarity has reduced, which it appears to the distance between the two has really reduced across the board societally, what are the effects on society? And can a person maintain their part of the two-sidedness, build up their, if they're a guy, their end, if they're a girl, their end? How can this polarity be maintained, kept?
I think the issue is why is marriages down statistically? So when it's not just the polarity issue, it's just the fact that people are not getting married anymore. Our society is actually glorifying single parenthood. And I'm not demonizing single parenthood. I'm a single parent myself. So there's a lot of factors at play. In fact, I'm just going to go based on what I'm saying right now instead of your question. Statistically, women are initiating more of the divorces in today's modern age. 60 to 80% of the divorces are initiated by women. So if a man is about his money, or if a man's about his peace of mind, he's not going to get married. I've never been married. So there's a reason why that I haven't. I think hookup culture has detrimentally affected relationships today. And I think, going back to your question, I think absolutely that each individual can operate on their own authority, could operate on their own femininity, on their own masculinity, and then find a partner. Now, unfortunately, like if if you go against the grain, you have less of an opportunity to get into a relationship, correct? So, but again, if that's your peace of mind, then it's better to be on your own than with someone who makes you miserable, So it just depends on what you want to do. Do you want to go with the rest of society, with the mainstream? Be by all means, go ahead. If you're gonna be a beta cuck, if you're gonna be beta bitch, if you're gonna be a masculine woman, a boss bitch, a boss babe, like there's consequences to it, and that's why I think you have to understand is you just can't do something or conduct yourself a lifestyle and not hold yourself accountable to those decisions. The fact is, a man who's about himself, about his who's in his masculine frame, is not gonna date a masculine woman. He just isn't. Same thing with a man. Like if he just wants to be a nice guy, wants to be a nice guy to women, and now, mind you, I'm not saying that he's not going to be a good man. It's two very different things here. But if he's going to be a nice guy, he's going to be a carpy. He's going to say yes to a woman. Happy wife, happy life. Which is, I think, a bullshit ideology. There's consequences to that. There really is. Again, I'm not saying you can't compromise. No, that's not what I'm saying here. But I think that there's certain dynamics in a relationship that have consequences. If you're disagreeable, just in general, like a man or a woman, that has consequences. It does. Most men will not go for a disagreeable woman. We're very basic. We actually don't have a lot of requirements for a relationship. As long as we're satisfied, as long as we're respected, as long as you give us peace of mind, we're good. You know what I mean? If you can't do those basic things, shit, what do you bring as a female?
Is there a lot of combative individuals on?
I think feminism has created a lot of combative females, right? And there's a reason why there's a movement called Passport Bros happening, because American females are extremely difficult to get along with. They're extremely difficult to retain a semblance of respect, not only towards them but to the man. In a society where any form of a man's perspective or opinion or boundary that it's perceived as control, it's like how do you work with these women? I think that I've opted out in dating for many years now, like in long-term dating, due to my own personal choices or even personal traumas. But I've opted out dating, and I participate in hookup culture. I've participated in short-term bursts of dating. Why? Because it's more peaceful that way, in my regard. I think that certain red pillars, or even like Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, will say like marriage is the top thing that you could really do in your life in terms of finding the right partner. But I think finding the right partner in this country in this day and age is extremely difficult, to the point where you could either opt out, or you could be hopeful, or you could go abroad.
Those are the options there.
I think so. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, if you just...
You're saying the numbers are against you.
Oh yeah, the numbers are against you, specifically if you're a man about your masculine frame and it's so interesting, like, because I think even some women will say, like, when a man's unapologetically himself, that's sexy, right? So like, you get to a point when you just become like, this is who I am. I'm unapologetically myself. But in reality, that it's actually turns off a lot of people, and I think that that's okay. You can't make everyone happy. You disappoint your own parents, your own mother, and when you make your own choices, when you have your own lifestyles, that's different than what you've been raised with, so if you make your own parents disappointed, then why should I care about someone else's disappointment, a woman's disappointment?
The quote that comes to mind is, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And then, but if the opposite of that is, if you do stand for certain things, then you're not as likely to be thrown off at every wind current that shows up, because you have your purpose or the things you value or what direction you're inclined towards, and so you're not as shaky. It seems better, because why would
You're
you
grounded.
Why would you prefer to be more
You're
shaky?
grounded.
If we have like a
That's extremely
tower.
sexy, despite like, let's say, like like those, like a leftist liberal or something is, it's like, oh, like this person's closed-minded and stuff, but I guarantee you that doesn't change the fact that she feels some sort of attraction,
There's something there.
because you're so strong and resolute.
It's like
and I'm saying from a masculine point of view, like, if you're strong and resolute, you resemble stability, and the biological and neurological framework of a woman seeks stability. You can't change the biology from that, so like, you could still be seen as an asshole to this woman, but that woman will eventually like find attraction with you given the right circumstances.
In some ways, it's important to represent something, because if you're not sticking with something, it's almost like you write a persuasive essay, and then at the 4th paragraph, you say, well, I don't know about paragraph 1, and the 5th paragraph, you say, well, take these things with a grain of salt, and then paragraph 6, you're like, paragraph 2 is a little bit shaky too. You might want to reread that, and I don't fully agree with it. You wouldn't be a persuasive essay, because your 6 paragraphs, they even have counters to themselves. You can't.
No one respects an indecisive, flip-flopping individual, let alone if you're a flip-flopping man, right? So I think it's vital for the young people listening to this to find out who you are. Find out what your non-negotiables are, in life. Like this is not okay. This is okay. This is not okay. This is what I'm going to tolerate. This is what I'm not going to tolerate. Because it's important, man. It's important to stand your ground on certain philosophical ideas or humanitarian ideals,
And sort of like now you go out into the world and you say, well, I care about A and B and 3. And then now you have described your end. Now whoever wants to join in or participate, they can join in or participate. But you already, it's like you set up the Facebook group of your being, and then whoever wants to join that Facebook group can join, versus not really having a being, trying to join other people's groups, and then after a period of time saying, but what about this thing? It's a little bit underhanded.
It's pretty much like, are you going to be a leader or are you going to be a follower?
Mm-hmm.
And I think people tend to follow leaders.
Right.
So it's really an element of like, are you gonna take your life by the balls and lead, or are you going to be dependent on others?
There's some resolute strength in that. Yeah. The polarity issue is a big one, and the discussion, some of the people we've mentioned, they didn't exist 5 years ago. The amount of discussion in the last 5 years in this space on this side of the material, it was not there. If you go back 7 years ago, it just wasn't there, and it would have been highly penalized publicly to speak more on like having boundaries or
definitely boundaries. Like what sane person would take children to drag shows and say that's educational or that's empowering for them. Like that. This is happening in leftist, the liberal school districts. Like what sane individual like thinks that's parading a depraved like form of sexuality or confused dysphoric sexuality okay to the most impressionable population in the world. So yeah, I completely agree with that statement. Like, just a couple years ago, this is unheard of. You don't do that. You don't talk about sexuality in schools. And I'm targeting that setting because at the end of the day, like, you do you, boo. You're an adult. You could do whatever you want with your body. You could do whatever you want, how you want to dress like or be identified with. You really do. You really can. I could give two shits less. Pardon my French, but when you try to infect your ideology to children, I think there's an element where it's like, wait a minute, this is not okay. I think it's okay to say this is not okay in this frame. Same thing with standing up for women and saying you're trying to enter female sports, but that's not okay because genetically you're a man, right? And at this point, it's just cheating. It's a form of cheating, and it's not okay.
One thing that comes to mind is that the vocalizing space, it's good. I think it's good when you get to say things, because I never liked the periods. You could go 5 years back, 10 years back, 15, 20, 25 years back, and there's always things that if you talk about that, there's a public backlash. I never liked it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even in categories that didn't matter to me. I didn't like it 20 years ago, 25 years ago, because there's something about it that's like squishing a person, or
that we're constantly monitored, like, cancel culture, because, if you're canceled today, then someone else is going to get canceled tomorrow for some other opinion, right? So it goes based on how fragile are we as a society that we can't even have a discussion about certain things,
We should be able to have.
And then who controls the cancel culture? Who controls the dialogue? And at this point, you have to understand that the leftists control, let's say 60 to 80% of the mainstream media, of the networks. So who's, so we're allowing one side to control the narrative.
Narrative is very important. I've talked about that quite a bit. Narrative is a big deal because there's an overarching story that is placed, and then it's not just like for your, here, this is a nice story you can use. It's somewhat like a cloud of stories, so that, okay, well, I have alternates to these parts of the story. Well, we're not doing that. This is the paragraph we're doing. There's something about it I don't like, which is a removing you aspect, which is the same thing that canceling does. It doesn't make sense. Watch this. Johnny, you're canceled. It doesn't work. Did you disappear? No.
Yeah, did my opinions and beliefs just all of a sudden just disappear?
It's an odd concept, and I don't think it's actually occurred really. It's sort of been described that way, but no human was like, it's not like poof and then erased. But conceptually, it has had impacts on people, probably deleterious to some people's well-being over a year or two or three, because suddenly their world that they live in is now like, you need to fix that. It's almost like a real personal attack.
Poor J.K. Rowling, like I just, that's my response to what you're saying, in terms of how a person's life could be affected. I can't imagine what she went through just for expressing an opinion that happens to be fact. and everyone turned against her. The people who acted in her franchise turned against her as well. So it's just, I mean, if that happened, can you how many family and friends also turned against her? Whereas at a certain point, the public would probably celebrated her at one point, and then cancel culture hit, and then all of a sudden she's has to be like isolated. That's just ridiculous.
I want to add in a point that comes up in my mind is I also am not fond of the opposite too. When someone is like floating on the ocean wave of the current moment and things are working in their favor, and let's say they're giving 40, I'm just making up a number, but thanks to the ocean wave behind them, their 40 looks like 90. I'm not a fan of that either, because put them in the other side of the pendulum at that time, and their 40 is now like a 12.
I think there's certain people that go with the waves, right? And you definitely see that with politicians. You know, like at one point they're saying, I think Biden is a good example specifically because he's president now, but he even said, like, at one point he said marriage is between a man and a woman, and then now he's saying transsexuals are created by God. You know, so it's like, which one is it?
On that one, the marriage unit, the strong family unit, it is. I saw it yesterday, and I was reading Gene Twenge's Generations. Talks about the different demographics, like the boomers, the silent generation, the Gen Z, millennials, all of them, and the features associated with them. But it's very clear in her book and various output that numbers of some sort of strong family unit in any way described are on the downslope.
Decrease. Yeah.
It's also obvious now that religion, which has before been diminished more so at times of these downslopes, starts to, wait a minute, that has a compelling force that keeps things going in a good direction. Can you speak on people's connection with religion and how maybe that diminishing at the same time is connected to diminishment of society? Is there any linkages there?
Well, you know, I'm not a religious man, so I'm not really pro the concept of religion helps society. You know, in fact, I kind of look at religion as a form of control. You know, in terms of throughout history, you know, considering an interesting concept of religion that I tell people is, you know, if you study history and anthropology, is that stories, traditions, you know, get passed around. I mean, if you think about even Christmas, Jesus' birth, right? That's, for one, that's not when he was born. And then two, that comes from like the winter solstice, like a pagan holiday, you know, so stories get intermingled. You know, the flood story, you know, every culture and religion had some sort of flood story, you know. You know, so religion, to me, it originates from a desire to understand the world, to understand heartache, death, and to, you know, propagate like some sort of community spirit, you know. So in a way, you know, I think that I think it was vital for our progression for the human species. But then a lot of things in life that human beings do is we tarnish something that was gold. Gold gets tarnished, so we're gonna tarnish some, you know, whatever we create, you know. So when I think about religion, I think about, you know, almost like genocide and you know, conquering countries will dominate, you know, and assert their dominance. You know, if you go against
like historical wars
in a historical context. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm totally going off tangent here. Who and what and why are we? No. But you know, I you know what, yeah, you know, just going back to the question at hand, I think on one front, I think it's better that we stray away from religion, in a sense, just so we could be free as humans, if that makes sense. I'm on a personal level, I've never felt more free by not being by walking away from religion. Whereas someone else who is a recent convert from not believing in something could say the same thing. I've never felt more free, but by believing in a higher power, right? So the experience could be relative. Because I think what needs to be happen more is the emphasis of spirituality. Whereas religion's more based on rules and customs and traditions, and not really asking about tough questions regarding, God and humanity and whatever. But I think spirituality, such as like Buddhism, where they help you like become like a better person, versus religious people where they kind of like hold you captive on the potentiality of the possibility of hell, right? So I think in terms of society, like when you propagate a religion, it's almost like false morality. It's disingenuous morality. Whereas if you propagate spirituality, your own personal relative point of view of life and death and God, I think that kind of propagates more of a self-growth approach to life that will stick. That makes sense.
If there was a counterforce, if there was a person here that was in a religious form and said that the person who was not connected with it would be lost in a way.
That's their point of view, right? I've heard that before too. I came from a Christian background. I came from a Catholic background. I came from a Christian school my whole life. Of course, that's what we labeled non-believers. You're lost. And then you walked away from religion, you're lost. But that's relative. That's not absolute. And I think that's what a lot of religious people, Christians, Jews, Muslims have an issue with, is that their faith doesn't necessitate absolute truth. But it helps them guide their life to think it's absolute truth. But then they try to propagate it to other people that it is absolute truth, because it helps them and their decision to follow that faith, right? So if you go against my belief, that's almost you're attacking my belief and my decision to be part of that lifestyle, that be part of that community, be part of that faith. So again, to me, like if you look at truth, like a lot of religious people will say like there's black and white, morality is black and white, but to be honest, a lot of life is spectrum. There's certain universal truths of morality. There really is. There really is. Infanticide, patricide, matricide. That's all bad in every culture, right? So there are certain things that have like universal truths, but there's other things that are relative. Based on geography, based on family, based on religion. Like the Middle East, we're getting married to like 14-year-old girls. Just 10, 20, 30 years ago, and probably in certain areas like Saudi Arabia, that's still going on. So like it's, and then I'm talking about one subject, which is the age of consent, right? So you go to certain places in America, the age of consent 16, not 18. So in terms of morality, it's really just relative in certain regards, and I think that's what's the beauty about life, is that it doesn't matter how long we've lived on this earth, we can't say for certain where we came from, where we're going, and what's right and what's wrong in certain places, because we've recycled religions, we've recycled empires, we've recycled governments, and we're still just as clueless as certain things. We've created pyramids, we've created cities, we've created roads, but we can't recreate the pyramids, right? I don't know. I think life is a circle. Like developed so much, and then we just go back to, well, we lost how to create that pyramid, right? But we're doing some other things, so we're just constantly going around in a circle of innovation, of creativity, of discussion.
Actually, is there ever more discussion now than there is right now? Because there's so many people have taken discussion into their own hands. Has there ever been as much vocalization in certain niches and topics than today? Like the amount of content put out today. Have we ever had a time like this?
No. This is I think the first is just the fact that we could all connect globally, and everyone's talking about their own goddamn opinion, you know. And that's okay. I think again, this is all relative. I think part of it's good to have an open discussion. I mean, like let's say, okay, no internet, no technology,
No internet,
right? Nothing. So parts of and I'm just gonna use this as an example, not to spread hate and not to sow any negativity. In terms of like, let's say, like, the Muslims, like they're very legalistic in how they view the Quran and how they interpret the Quran, and the sheikhs and the muftis are the only ones that could offer a new interpretation, right? So I actually read a book, I forget her name, but she was a Canadian lesbian Muslim, and one of her critiques is the fact that you cannot constructively break down the Quran and say, hey, this might be wrong or something, right? Like, you can't do that. Technically you can't do that with the Christians, but I think there's due to theology school, I think a lot of laymen, or not like religious sect, are able to go in and study the word, right? And say and interpret as they will. They don't have that ability in most of the Middle East. So so now with technology, they could hear a different point of view. And again, we go back to, what's the point of constructive criticism? Right? It's to inspire change. It's to inspire growth. And there's a theory that the reason why the Middle East is the way it is in terms of stasis is that they really haven't really improved in a lot of regards of their life, with the exception of, like, let's say Dubai, or, obviously there's other factors, like, let's say, Western countries, invasions, I get that, but to escape victim mentality, especially over there, there's a reason why there's no growth. Is because they're not allowed to have opposing ideologies towards their faith, And again, I'm not sowing negativity. I'm not sowing racism or bigotry or anything like that. No, I love Muslim people, So it goes back to their ability to deconstruct their religion and their practices in a humane way, to understand that there's progression from a certain ideology, In a way, Christianity has gone through that. I don't think Islam has, and they may never do.
One very nice thing that came to my mind, because I'm always hilarious, but it's nice to have, because I don't go much into categories of, we'll call it, liveliness. So the fact that we're covering all of them in one is a real check off the box for the.
It's neat, right? It's neat, right? Like, I'm like,
it's great, because
like you and your channel will do fine, but I'll probably be canceled tomorrow morning.
They cannot cancel a human being. I don't even like saying the word because it doesn't make sense, but yeah, I never agree with the idea that vocalization was somehow subdued. I just didn't agree with it.
Well, it's anti freedom of speech, right? So, which is it's very popular in that area of the world. where you limit freedom of speech.
It's just like I think about it from smaller form. Like let's say there's me, you, and if there was a third person here, and I say like goldfish, and then that person's like, no, that's
a small scale. That's a really small scale.
That's how I think about things. Like, oh, now that person telling me I can't say goldfish, my life is now.
Oh.
You get what I'm saying?
Very, very soon we can't even say women anymore. We're gonna have to call them birthers, right?
So, not a fan of the enclosure. Because when you have good intent, enclosure looks just like enclosure. It doesn't look
I
like.
say it's back to control. Like, why are they trying to limit speech? It's control.
If enclosure made sense, which I can't see it, I would be. But yeah, it's nice to be able to communicate. I have to bring that up. I shouldn't even have to bring that up. I don't even like bringing it up, but it's nice to be able to communicate in full. That's funny. I almost feel like it's me and there's like Earth on the side. Like, are you really gonna? Come on, that's hilarious. Now,
so what about them flat earthers, Armin? Let's talk about that.
Oh, that's another thing too. I'm glad you asked. There's a lot of categories that are. Oh, this is an important one. Controversial. That I don't think of. Like it's not even. It's like you asked me about World of Warcraft. It's not my. I have certain categories that are my interest, and then I let other people handle World of Warcraft.
Are you opening the door so we could talk about nerd stuff now?
Well, we could.
Because I think we've touched a lot about serious topics, and I've been a good boy. And
No, video games are the serious topic. Those were light topics. Those were, video games are more serious. I'm kidding on that one, but to some, video games are a big deal. Yes, we could include.
I think it's just a form of escapism, just like reading.
There's a lot of escapism going on right now.
Is it fiction? I get that confused. Like sci-fi, fantasy stuff.
Fiction.
Like that's fiction. So like. That in itself are channels of escapism, right?
Right. Tell us about escapism.
And escapism isn't necessarily a negative thing, too. Like it's, I think reading really stimulates your mind, right? You don't have to always necessarily read something that is fiction or is fiction and nonfiction.
Nonfiction.
Set in the real world, and I think because I come from like a very dorky, nerdy kind of. I don't want to say background, or a set of hobbies or activities. I think 20 years ago it wasn't necessarily like such a big deal, but now I think the nerds and the dorks are ruling the world. Like you look at one of the most important nerds out there, Henry Cavill, who's probably one of the sexiest guys alive. This guy made it built his own computer so he could game. He starred in the Witcher series, which he's a big fan of. He's like a Warhammer fan. Like, he's a huge nerd. 20 years ago, that wasn't, if it wasn't for Marvel, obviously, or Star Wars and Marvel, liking fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, like unreal elements is not part of like the ethos, of the time of like the 80s and 90s. It still wasn't there. I think it hit the 2000s where our ethos, what's that word? It starts with a Z. Zeitgeist, yeah, because I think the zeitgeist now is like super like nerdy and dorky and like science fictiony now,
Right, it has shifted in that way. 20 years ago, there was like that crew was stepped on. I noticed that there's always a theme of a crew that's stepped on, and then about 10, 15, 20 years later, the strength comes from that because that's almost like hard times. The
pendulum thing. It goes back to the pendulum thing.
And hard times.
The ebb and flow
week to week. Because the human instinct kicks in. I've talked about that before, that when you're imposed on and you're a human, and we've seen this for all of history, shout out to historical context, humans don't do well with getting squished for too long. At some point, it's like, and then the people who are not getting squished got a little bit more comfortable. The people that were getting squished now have that energy, and then it shifts. So it's almost like humans are the element in a atom that's like boom, 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 through us as a whole, not just one person, but like a big grouping. It's not usually just one person. It's more like a large swath of people.
It's like the wave at a baseball stadium, right?
Yes.
It's
And
not
what are you
just
supposed
one
to do? That
person,
wave
it's-
comes. It's really difficult to, even if let's say you don't stand up during that wave. It's a really good example. You looks like it was still a wave. You basically did not really.
You know what's interesting is like when
That's a good
you're
example,
at a baseball game, and there's almost like an opposing ideas or in your heads, like I want to join with the rest of these people, right? And then after a while you just get like, look at these sheeple, I'm not gonna do it now, or vice versa. So it's just really interesting how
That thing is
we
working
have that
through
capacity to understand, like, am I gonna be a sheeple, or am I gonna stand out or not stand
you.
out?
People are
or-
doing that math in their head.
Yeah, they're doing that math in their head, and it's and again I say the word sheeple, but like in that context, doing the wave at a baseball game doesn't make you a sheeple. That's not a I'm trying to annotate that doesn't necessitate that it's a negative thing.
I like the example very much because it showcases a few things where, let's say you don't do the wave during the wave, it still look like a wave.
Are you a rebel with a cause or a rebel without a cause?
Valid point. Sounds like a song lyric, maybe something like that. So, but
James Dean.
I don't get any of the references, I want to point out. But I will say, but if one and then another and then another and another start to feel, okay, we're countering this, then you can start to take away from the wave and it can diminish. That's the same way with society. One just strong, I'm going to take a stand for this, is almost like a pummeling.
Others will follow suit.
Right, and you need that to occur.
And again, this is why they want weak men out there, so they don't stand up, so they don't say, hey, this is wrong, because it's a domino effect.
Actually, let's put that as the descriptive closing on this one, which is an important category. To be I'll focus on the being a man because that's a discussion of the last 5 years. 3 key elements of being a strong man. Bam.
3 key elements. I think direction. I think that goes in combination of like being principled, having a direction, and having a purpose. So purpose driven, right? The second one is action based. Like you have to. There has to be some sort of action to it. And third.
You have direction. You're taking action. What is a third potential item?
About being a man. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I think
Because so far, actually, you made me think of like a vector.
accountability, even. Accountability, stepping up, and
You're responsible.
yeah, there has to be some sort of awareness of your choices, I guess. If that makes sense.
You're connected to the
You're,
larger scale space of
yeah,
humans.
yeah.
I messed up. Okay, I actually messed up. I took a little hit. It's an actual hit. Okay, I did well. It's because I did stuff. Okay.
And I think with accountability, it speaks of responsibility, and responsibility speaks of your ability to care for others, possibly, or even the community, right? So, community needs leaders. The government needs leaders. Your family needs a leader. Bada bing.
And the
Bada
second
boom,
part,
man. Bada boom.
I had that. I was delaying that second part. That's classic. What funny. Johnny. Wide variety of material. By the way, I want to point out you're more like a podcast than I am.
We could have our own podcast. Imagine.
But what I'm saying is you're more naturally the default that people think of that's a podcast is Johnny versus the default is not the way I normally. So I want to point that out. You're more like a podcaster.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. It has more. I don't even know how to describe it, but it has more.
You put a mic in my hands and a couple questions.
Yeah. It's more
I'm
free flow,
golden.
conversational topics and speaking. And also, longest 4K episode, I would like to say. Shout outs to that.
Woo-wee!
Johnny, I would like to thank you for having joined on episode number 396 of the program. 390 after your original.
I can't wait to be on the 696 one.
He is throwing out some large numbers. Glad to have you on. And we are out.
All right, sir.